Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start the program. If I can ask you to turn off your cell phones to avoid any interruptions in the program. And if you do not want your photo taken, please let the Surrey Board of Trade staff know. We do use photos for both internal and external publications. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and welcome to the Surrey Board of Trade BC Natural Resources Lunch. So important to British Columbia's economy. Thank you so much for attending. We begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Before I introduce your Master of Ceremonies this afternoon, I just wanted to let you know that this is such a timely lunch in our country, in our province, in our city. Surrey is an opportunity city. We're going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. We're growing by 1,400 people a month. We have the most number of manufacturers in British Columbia right here in Surrey. We have the most number of vendors to the mining industry right here in Surrey, and you're going to hear more and more about that. But I wanted to just tell you about two things. 2 weeks ago, on February 14th, the Surrey Board of Trade issued a statement urging our members to write their Member of Parliaments, relevant ministers, urging them to take action on the blockades happening across the country. Canada's economy and global image are in jeopardy if nothing is done. And we've already seen it because so many of our manufacturers, 70% of our goods across the country are shipped by rail. And Surrey in itself has a significant CN intermodal facility. They ship goods on rail across our great country. So we're urging the federal government, along with the provincial government, to ensure that there is action on this file. And we need our members' continued support to do that. The second item that I wanted to mention is there are documents that were given to you at each of your place settings or while you walked in. And they are business continuity guides as well as a crisis communications guide. And this is a pandemic emergency planning guide for each of your businesses, each of your organizations that I urge all of you to fill out. Even if we don't have a pandemic, this is a business continuity plan in the event of a flood, fire, earthquake, etc. So give it to your HR department, you fill it out, but it will give you a peace of mind. And we don't know what's going to happen with this coronavirus, but businesses today more than ever should make the wise investment in developing, implementing, and maintaining a viable continuity management program. And this is so important, especially for our small businesses that drive BC's economy. So we're going to give you this kit. It's on our website, businessinsurrey.com. We'll be holding some workshops related to it, but we're urging all of our members, all of our businesses in Surrey to ensure that they fill out these two guides. It will give your business a peace of mind. Make sure that your vendors also have a business continuity program. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome, we have a great partnership with the BC Business Council, and I'm just so pleased that he's here in Surrey. He's the Chief Economist and Vice President for the Business Council of BC. Let's give him a great Surrey welcome, Mr. Ken Peacock.
Well, thank you, Anita. That is the most enthusiastic welcome I have ever received, so it's much appreciated. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here to moderate today's event, and that's not just because I came directly from White Rock and avoided the commute downtown, but it's because Surrey Board of Trade is where business happens. It's a great organization. The organization supports business. It works to foster business attraction and expansion. It engages with businesses, educational facilities, and policymakers on workforce development and international trade matters. The Surrey Board of Trade also works extensively with local government, but also is a strong advocate for business in the provincial and federal spheres as well. So, very pleased to be here. Great organization. Welcome, everybody. Let's get on with today's event. Firstly, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. Supporting sponsors, and let's all keep in mind that these events don't happen without sponsorship, so it's greatly appreciated. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, also known as CAP, sponsor CN Rail. Then the community sponsors, British Columbia Institute of Technology, BCIT, and Fortis. Media sponsors, the Surrey Now Leader Media Group, and the Business and International Trade Center sponsors, the law firm of Fasken, the accounting firm of PwC, and the Chamber of Commerce Group Insurance Plan and SNF Group Benefits. Please, ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome applause for our sponsors. Also, before moving on with the program, we have a number of special guests in the audience I would like to recognize and acknowledge. I'm going to ask everybody to hold the applause till the end because it's a fairly long list, and then we'll give everybody a warm welcome and a round of applause. Firstly, Bruce Ralston, Minister of Energy, Mines, and Petroleum Resources, and MLA for Surrey Guildford, or Surrey Whalley, sorry. Surrey Whalley, the Guildford's the next one. Gary Begg, MLA for Surrey Guildford. Mike Brenier, MLA for Peace River South. Jagrup Brar, MLA for Surrey Fleetwood. Ian Patton, MLA for Delta South. And representing the First Nations LNG Alliance, Chief Clifford White, hereditary leader and former elected councillor of the Kitglat Nation. I butchered it. I'll get it better next time. First Nation. And finally, Marvin Hunt, MLA Surrey Panorama Ridge. Warm round of applause, everybody. The Surrey Board of Trade is a leader in BC's business community. It represents nearly 3,000 businesses, has 6,000 member contacts that collectively reach an estimated 60,000 employees. That's a broad reach and a significant organization. The Surrey Board of Trade believes transportation and education are two critical economic foundations for building the city. Aspects and elements of infrastructure and education I completely support and agree with. The board advocates for policies that support the city's growth, but also engages at the provincial and national levels, as I mentioned. To hear a little bit more on this and the Surrey Board of Trade's activities, please now turn your attention to the screens in the room. A sec. I needed that buffer. I needed that time to prepare for my next comments. Well, that's probably a good thing. We have a very busy agenda today, so we will use the time to our advantage. Okay, it's now my distinct pleasure to introduce our first speaker, the Honourable Bruce Ralston. He was recently appointed Minister responsible for Energy, Mines, and Petroleum Resources. Prior to that, he was Minister of Jobs, Trade, and Technology. Bruce was first elected as MLA back in 2005, re-elected 2009, 2013, and then again in 2017. Please welcome Honourable Bruce Ralston up to the stage.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. Good afternoon. As was mentioned, I'm newly appointed to this particular ministry. I think I'm in the beginning of the end of week 4. So, but it's a fascinating ministry, really important to the province, and lots of big issues to deal with. So I'm really having fun digging in on on many of the issues that confront us here in the province. I want to acknowledge my legislative colleagues. I think they've all been mentioned. Also want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly acknowledge Clifford White, who's First Nation LNG Alliance Board member, a hereditary leader, and a former elected chief councillor of the Gitga'ala Nation. Let me just talk a little bit about the ministry and what some of the key issues. I have the panel here who will, I think, are set to respond and pounce on my every comment. So Susan says no, so that's a relief. I do oversee the mining industry, oil and gas sector, and support our Clean BC initiative and our climate action goals. So I think everyone here would acknowledge and recognize the foundational importance of natural resource sectors in our British Columbia economy. But let me go through each one of them in perhaps a short sequence just to give you my preliminary thoughts on each sector that I'm responsible for. The mining, we just had mining day in British Columbia over at the legislature. Michael Goehring was there, and I see a number of representatives of the mining sector who were there in Victoria. Clearly, the mining sector creates a lot of jobs in British Columbia and contributes to responsible mining products and low-carbon technologies while supporting Indigenous reconciliation. It is the largest private sector employer of Indigenous people in Canada, and the sector employs more than 30,000 people in BC alone. As part of my scaling up on the file, I toured New Afton Mine just outside the city limits of Kamloops, where they told me 27%, fully 27% of their workforce are Indigenous members of the community. Beyond direct employment, the economic benefits mining and smelting provides for communities across BC are remarkable. I did a video for the Mining Association of BC. Unfortunately, I didn't remember to bring it here today, but Surrey itself, as I said in the video, I'll reprise it a little bit, Surrey itself is a mining community. There are 150 companies here who supply to the mining sector, and doing about $90 million of revenue annually. So sometimes the perception of mining is that it's established in rural and remote communities and doesn't have much to do with metropolitan or Greater Surrey, as we sometimes say here. That was a joke, I don't know. But certainly mining is very important to the prosperity of the Lower Mainland and of the province as a whole. And the mining cluster that's centered in Vancouver, there's over 800 companies that have head offices here, provide mining services, whether it's engineering services, environmental services, financing, and just general headquarter services for mining operations that are scattered around the globe. So mining is really integral to the BC economy. We're focused on growing the mining sector here in British Columbia, but we have recognized that there are some challenges that the sector faces. My predecessor in this position, Michelle Mongel, commissioned a report. The Mining Jobs Task Force came up with 25 recommendations. The government has adopted all of them and is in the process of implementing, has implemented 17 and will implement another 5 by the end of March. Part of one of the recommendations was to spend more money to improve the permitting process. I have already encountered some concerns that have been expressed about delays in permitting, and well as mine safety for workers and the environment. So in the budget, we're again in 2020, we're focused on delivering more efficient and effective mine-related permitting to create quality economic growth opportunities. That will be without diminishment of environmental standards or the necessary consultations, but I'm convinced, based on my quick and early review of the the file, that things could be done faster and more efficiently, and that's why the additional resources have been supplied to achieve just that. We've done some other things in the sector. The new mine allowance under the Mineral Tax Act has been extended 5 years to 2025. PST exemptions for pollution control and waste management machinery equipment no longer face geographic restraints. Formerly, they were focused on specific geographic areas. We're also leading the way when it comes to partnering competitiveness with low-carbon initiatives. And we're implementing the province's reconciliation goals by partnering with Indigenous people on mining-related opportunities. So we hope to create new mining jobs here in British Columbia, but not at the cost of our environment or our Indigenous partners. The other natural resource sector within my ministry is the oil and gas sector. We have a representative, Mike Bernier, who is an MLA from Dawson Creek in the Northeast, intimately familiar with the importance of that sector to the Northeast, but as in mining, to the economy of the province as a whole. That industry is creating new opportunities, including jobs for women, Indigenous people, and those who are otherwise underrepresented in the trades, while providing economic benefits to communities along the route. For example, Fort Nelson First Nation, under their day-to-day Economic Development Corporation, partnered with the Black Diamond Group in 2009 and led the nation to assume operations of the Horn River Lodge, a 700-person oil and gas camp. Today, the Fort Nelson First Nation maintains the operations of the lodge and have grown their business to include 4 hotels and a hot springs lodge. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was pleased to sign a permit that will enable them to advance the Clarklake Geothermal project in the mature Clarklake gas field very near their community. Unlike wind, solar, and run-of-river projects, which are intermittent, geothermal is a firm, reliable source of generation, providing electrical capacity whenever it is needed. Under Clean BC, our program, the province is working in collaboration with Indigenous peoples like the Fort Nelson First Nation to seize new energy and economic development opportunities. We're also focused with working with the industry and significantly the federal government on initiatives such as electrification of upstream oil and gas, which will play a large part in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the federal and the provincial government have signed a protocol which commits the federal government to a major financing of the electrification of the gas fields in northeast British Columbia. LNG is undoubtedly playing a key role in British Columbia's future economy. Our government has always supported LNG development, providing it met 4 conditions. In opposition, I was the LNG critic for many years, so I have some familiarity with the file. And our 4 conditions were these. The enterprise has to guarantee a fair return for our resources, guarantee jobs and training opportunities for British Columbians, respects and makes partners of First Nations, and that it protects BC's air, land, and water, and lives up to the province's climate commitments. LNG Canada met all of those conditions. At $40 billion, theirs is the single largest private sector investment ever made in Canada. The facility is in the 2nd year of construction. Their employee accommodation center, Cedar Valley Lodge, will open the first 1,500 beds early spring of this year in Kitimat. Between the LNG Canada facility and the Coastal GasLink pipeline, there are currently over 3,000 people hired to work on these 2 projects. There are 2,000 people employed on the LNG Canada project at this point, with many of the construction workforce in Kitimat. Coastal GasLink's current workforce is 1,000 and is expected to grow later this year. At peak construction, LNG Canada will employ about 7,500 workers with about 4,500 on site at any given time. Now, I don't think anyone who's been following the news in the last couple of months or couple of weeks or even yesterday and today will know that there are challenges to the government decision, the joint federal, provincial, the environmental approvals, the 21st Nations who have signed impact benefit agreements for an estimated $700 million in economic benefits from the construction of the Coastal GasLink. There are challenges to that. We are committed, and Minister Fraser of my cabinet colleague and Minister Bennett, a federal minister, are in Smithers today, continuing talks. We will continue to work with all levels of government in an effort to find a peaceful resolution to the impasse regarding the Coastal GasLink project. We respect, and I don't think this needs to be stated, but I will state it just to be sure, we respect everyone's right to peaceful protest, and we support the exercise, people in the exercise of their democratic rights within the law. So we're not condoning or supporting or in any way encouraging illegal activity. The Premier has made that very clear on behalf of the government, and I'm sure that's a view that everyone here shares. It's important to know in looking at this sector and this project that British Columbia has engaged extensively with Indigenous communities, including consultation with both hereditary chiefs and elected bands of the Wet'suwet'en. Broadly, these consultations have led to new partnerships, and the provincial government has signed benefit agreements with most of the Indigenous communities along the pipeline's route. Coastal Gas, as I mentioned, is also signed with all 20 First Nation communities along the pipeline route, and their consultation was exhaustive, extensive, very, very detailed, and was regarded, I think, until recent events, perhaps, as a model of effective and fair consultation on a major resource project. So we're committed to working in partnership and to advance reconciliation, and I'm optimistic that there will be a way forward, but we'll see what happens today and in the days to come. I see Anita's flexing there. I've got a few more things to say. Just let me say from my previous ministry, the importance of innovation and technology is something that I bring to the file. I'm interested in connecting our technology, our homegrown technology and innovation with the mining, energy, and petroleum sectors. So just to give you one example, MineSense Technologies is a British Columbia company based in Vancouver. They have a technology which basically in the scoop of a shovel that lifts ore out of the ground, there's computers which immediately assay the mineral content of each shovelful and send a stream of data to a central depot where it's analyzed. So that improves the economics of extracting ore, because if it falls below a certain standard, you take it one place. If it falls in a medium and a middle category, they store it until the price of the metal goes up, and then there's a third category which they send to processing. So it's a quick sort right at as the shovel comes out of the ground. It also reduces requirements for grinding, and therefore less consumption of electricity and water. I was also in the same trip up in Highland Valley and saw the technology at work there. The tech owns Highland Valley, and it's being tested and trialed right there. So Val will talk about the Natural Resources Survey, Val Litwin, but I think it's worth noting that 96% of the people surveyed believe that promoting innovation is a key to improving the resources sector, and he will talk more about that, and I think I'm running out of time. I'm also responsible for BC Hydro. I think that's a discussion perhaps, maybe Anita will invite me back to talk about BC Hydro alone. I spoke with a former minister who was responsible for Hydro, Bill Bennett, and he said basically BC Hydro is it's a separate country, really, so which I thought was a interesting way of putting it. So I'd be grateful to talk to you more about the natural resource sectors and that I'm responsible for, but I think I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for the insightful comments. A lot going on, some challenging times still, but your comments are much appreciated, and thank you for being here. Now I would like to invite Val Litwin, President and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce, up to the stage to give us a brief presentation. And I'd just like to say, prior to his role with the BC Chamber, Val was CEO of the Whistler Chamber of Commerce for 3 years, and he's been very active in entrepreneurial business activities, I was learning last night while researching his background. So, well positioned to provide comments. Please come up, Val. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have 30 seconds now, right, Anita? Okay, I got to go fast. First of all, I want to say thanks to Anita for having the BC Chamber here today. Of course, we have a great relationship with Anita and her team out here at this particular Board of Trade. And I do want to say publicly, Anita, the work you have been doing to stand up for your members in the last couple of weeks and months has been tremendous. We are well served by you and your organization out here. So thanks to Anita and her team for all the great work they're doing out here. I have only a few minutes, so I have to be brief, but I also have to be interesting. So Anita asked me to share the results of our BC Natural Resources Survey, which I'll do right now in very fast fashion, but of course, it is impossible, and the clicker's not working, so maybe when I raise my finger, we can just keep advancing the slides here. It's impossible to give you the whole survey right here, right now, so our communications team has put it on our Twitter wall. BC Chamber of Com is how you can get the full results. But let's get right into it, Jesrup. Well, I don't know if I've done something wrong here, but so why does an urban audience want to know about natural resources? Well, I think this particular urban Board of Trade knows better than anyone the connectivity between urban and rural resource and the economies you have here in the city. Whether you're in Kitimat or Kitsilano, there is connective tissue that stitches together this province between urban and rural resource sector and what's happening in our urban centers. And I think the minister said it best. Surrey is a mining town. That's maybe not the verbatim quote, but if we can get you to say that later, Minister, maybe we can use that. Teal Jones, of course, has been in your community for many years. They employ about, I think, 500 people out here. Of course, very hard hit recently, and I know Susan at Kofi is going to talk a little bit about that, access issues to the fiber base here in British Columbia. But for years, forestry has been powering this community, paychecks, community contributions, and even more recently, an award-winning distillery you have here in Surrey, Dragon Mist Distillery, of course, brings their grain in from northeast British Columbia through the South Peace Grain Co-op. So you're drinking amazing vodka here in Surrey because of grain that's coming from agriculture in the northeast. So it is all connected. But let's take a look at the survey results. I want you to know who we spoke to because the sample is important because it is unbelievably balanced and regionally representative. So we spoke to about 1,023 businesses just before Christmas. Politically, this is important. We like to make sure we have a balanced sample, and we were actually kind of stunned by the results. If you look in the top left there, that's the political distribution. Folks put up their hands and said, yeah, I identify as leaning more to the left, more to the right, I'm in the center. And you know, when we take these results to government, that's important because we don't want to have too much bias in there, Minister. I'm sure you're feeling pretty good about how you're seeing that balance there. In terms of regional distribution around BC, you can see Lower Mainland, Interior, Island, Coast, the North, rural, urban, suburban, good splits there, and some nice depth and range to our generational distribution. But I want to take you right to the results. The most striking takeaway, I think, was the overwhelming acknowledgement that natural resources are vital to BC's economy today. In fact, 98% of people said natural resources are either crucial or important to our economy. And I won't say I was surprised by this, but I will say I was impressed. And sorry, Jesrup, you're going to have to keep advancing it. This isn't working. But even more striking, 87% said natural resources are either crucial or important to my personal economic well-being. So I say this was striking because we discovered in our sample that half the people responding were in sector or very closely associated with the natural resources sector, or the other half was out of sector. So what you're hearing here across the province is whether you're in the natural resources sector or not, is there is an overwhelming plurality, almost 90% of people saying, you know what, it is so important to my personal economic well-being. I get it. We all depend on the wealth generated by these natural resources. We wanted to get out into the field and get a sentiment on the current health of the sectors individually and combined. And you can see for such widespread agreement on the wealth and prosperity natural resources generate for all of us, there is a sense that the health of the combined sectors is challenged. And when you think about some of the headwinds we've been up against in Canada, in BC, in recent years from a burdensome, I would say, regulatory environment, protests, flight of capital, investment, it's no wonder people's perceptions are less glowing than they could or should be given the natural resource abundance and wealth we have here in BC. And I just want to note, obviously, that forestry has had a very tough, I think Susan would say, a brutal year in British Columbia. And that's why you're seeing forestry get challenged from a perception standpoint. But leaders like Susan and Kofi are obviously doing great work, and other associations around BC to start to turn that around. We know a transition is underway. At the BC Chamber of Commerce, our belief is, even though we know we're going through a tough time right now with forestry, there is a way out of this. And thankfully, perceptions also confirm this. So take a look at this slide. We asked the question, 10 years from now, how important do you think each of these sectors will be to the BC economy? And you can see 47% of our sample thinks natural resources will be more important in the future, and 36% think they will have about the same importance. So combined, 83% of folks are saying an enhanced role or similar role for natural resources in the future is what will unfold. But what was even more telling is this. When we asked the question, how important would you prefer these sectors to become to the BC economy if you had your wish? Natural resources shoots right to the top of the list. 64% said, I want these sectors to become more important, and this might help explain why. We got into some of the perceptions around the natural resources sector, and I would say they're impressively healthy, especially when you parse them out by category. This was fascinating. Here the question was, out of the following pairs, which one best describes how you feel when you think about BC's natural resources? At the top of the list, we think they're well-paying. These are big paychecks coming out of these sectors. They're interesting. We're operating advanced equipment and technology. These projects are big. We're working on economic development at the local level. We have a lot of pride around these jobs. There's prosperity created by it. We're doing it in a world-class fashion. We're proud of this work. These are skilled people doing these jobs, of course, engineers, tech workers. And we think you're doing it environmentally thoughtfully. 65% of folks said, yeah, you know what, we're doing really well here. Is there some work to do at the bottom of the list? Absolutely. But when we all work together to bolster our natural resource narrative here in BC, I think one of the areas we should be focusing on is telling more stories around how we are innovating and doing it better than anyone else here. And I'm almost near the finish line. Overall, the perception report card, as I would call it, I think is impressive. It's definitive. So much so, this was a fascinating one. We asked people to identify whether or not they'd encourage young people to choose a career in the natural resources sector. 65% of people said, yeah, that's where I want my kid to end up. Probably because they think those sectors are doing so well with skills, with pay, et cetera, et cetera. So, in conclusion, there's some tension in the data, right? People see these sectors as driving wealth, but they're challenged because some of the headwinds I mentioned, and that's impacting perceptions around future prospects. But the desire across the board in BC is to remove the roadblocks and focus on opportunity. So to save time, I'm not going to read through these final slides. I think I've summarized it. But please go to our Twitter handle, BC Chamber of Com. Take a look at the full report, and looking forward to the panel and discussion accordingly. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Val. Very interesting, fabulous, fantastic backdrop and context for the rest of the discussion. But before we get to the panel, I want to invite one more special guest up and then the panel. I would now want to ask Chief Clifford White from the Kitkla First Nation to come up. He's also from the BC LNG Alliance, and he's going to say a few words from his perspective about LNG development in the province. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Coast Salish people for allowing us to do this business on their unceded territory, which is very important to all of us. Secondly, I'd like to thank Anita for squeezing me in on a very tight agenda. And I only have one very simple message. We're talking about natural resources. There's not an inch of this territory within British Columbia under which Indigenous communities are not a part of. So to work with them and to take the template that LNG Canada has left by Andy Kalich and Susanna Pierce and a whole bunch of other people on the team, working with Indigenous people, putting thousands of hours in on making sure that that worked for LNG Canada, and looking at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, along with them now put forward by the federal government, the non-extinguishment of rights and title for Indigenous people. It's very imperative that we actually keep the Indigenous people at the forefront, and that you do not forget them while you're going through this process, especially at the very beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for stepping in at the last minute. That was great. Okay, time for our panel. I'm going to invite our panelists to come up one at a time. I'll announce you as you come. Susan Yurkovich, come on up. Bryan Cox, President and CEO of the BC Alliance, and Susan is President and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industries, and Michael Goehring, President and CEO of the Mining Association. Welcome to our panelists. So, for the remaining time that we have, we're going to basically do a dialogue. We're going to encourage questions from the audience, so please think of questions you'd like to ask. I, as moderator, will take the prerogative. If you start to get into some long-winded statement, I will interject and cut you off. Please keep your questions concise. And when you do come up to the microphone, which is located in the center of the room, please state your name and the organization that you are with or representing. Just before we do that, though, I'm just going to kick things off with a couple questions. Oh, sorry, before we go to questions, I'm going to ask each panelist to summarize, give us a quick overview of the state of their industry. They're free to say whatever they want. They can talk about competitiveness. They can talk about the state of their industry. But I am going to constrain them to 3 minutes. So, start with Bryan.
Great. Thank you. Is this working? Can you hear me?
Perfect. Stand there too, Ken, and just sort of lord over us.
Yep. Got to make sure you only
Good.
have 3 minutes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, and thank you.
Anita, for putting this together today, Chief White, for your words, Minister, and Val for
the setup for this. Sorry.
try this. Hello, hello. Okay. Again, I'm Bryan Cox. I'm CEO of the BC LNG Alliance. I live in Cloverdale, so I live in Clayton Heights. So this is a home event for me today too. And Clayton Heights, as most of you know in this room, has one of the distinctions of being the fastest growing community in British Columbia. So I live right in the nexus of what growth is all about: schools, infrastructure, roads, healthcare. And what provides that but really strong economic growth. So I live that every day, and I get to work in an industry that's providing immense economic growth for this province, immense opportunity for economic reconciliation, as Chief White mentioned, and there's opportunity for much more. And I think the power of this panel is you have 3 industries up here that are foundational, because LNG truly is just an extension of a foundational industry, our natural gas industry in this province, and an opportunity to take this product to places that need it right now. So what are we doing? We're building an LNG industry. We're building the lowest emission LNG industry in the world. The LNG Canada project will be the lowest emission plant in the world. Rob Menge, who's here from Woodfibre LNG today, that facility will be even lower emission because it's going to be all electric. So here in British Columbia, we have this story to tell about the lowest emission product in the world and the continuum of innovation that's driving it even lower. So it's time to say yes to this industry fully. It's time to say yes to the economic reconciliation that comes with it. It's time to say yes to the benefit that it provides to cities like Surrey and every other city in this country. And so that's what I really want to talk about today. So I'll leave it there. I'll pass it to my colleagues and we'll get into discussion.
Great, thank you, Bryan. Over to Michael.
Thank you, Kent. I'm feeling like the thorn between 2 roses today. Actually, sitting with 2 natural resource superheroes. So it's great to be invited to the Surrey Board of Trade. Thank you, Anita. I'll start with, I think, an opinion and what is a demonstrable fact. Natural resources are at the heart of British Columbia's economy, and they are and have been key to our standard of living for some time. And they're also key to ongoing social and economic benefits for all British Columbians and to advance economic reconciliation with Indigenous communities all through this great land. And my concern about the blockades, there's a number of things that trouble me, but my key concern as I watch is that I think there's a huge opportunity there for us, for British Columbia, for all British Columbians, and for Indigenous communities, that we can be today a world-leading exporter of low-carbon natural resources. The world needs more BC timber, more clean LNG, and more minerals and metals, particularly today. And so I don't like to see that opportunity pass by. I would say that reconciliation is alive outside of the coverage that you see, which is definitely a plane crash. Planes land at YVR every day, hundreds of them. And going back a decade, 2 decades, while not perfect, BC's natural resource industries have been working with, cooperating and collaborating with Indigenous communities. So we need to find a constructive pathway forward on that. Let me turn to mining in British Columbia, and we are a world-leading producer of low-carbon minerals and metals, and the world needs more of that right now. Climate change is one of the key issues on the agenda for British Columbians. Economically, our industry supports some 33,000 jobs across the province. If you add in the exploration sector, that'll go up to just shy of 40,000. We generate $12 billion in economic activity on an annual basis, and we inject more than $3 billion into 215 communities across the province through the purchase of goods and services on an annual basis. We're a leader in advancing economic reconciliation with Indigenous communities. We have various agreements, IBAs, and other collaborative initiatives that respect rights and title and reflect the Declaration. And last year, the minister spoke to Surrey being a mining community, and I would fully agree with that. But last year, industry transferred just shy of $1 billion in direct payments to the provincial treasury. So that's $1 billion for healthcare, education, and other public services that British Columbians have come to depend on and value significantly. So bottom line, without a thriving mining sector, without a thriving forestry sector, natural gas, and the escalating LNG sector, you're going to see fewer hospitals, fewer growth in hospitals, education, all matter of public services, right? So our industry has been foundational to the BC economy. We ran a study last year, or this last summer, entitled One Province, One Economy, that looked at the supply chain of the BC industry. And I can tell you, the minister said earlier that right here in Surrey alone, there is 190 mining suppliers, and they generate $111 million in economic activity right here in Surrey. Next door in Langley, there's 100 mining supply companies, and they generate $40 million annually. Some of them are here in the room today. I'd like to acknowledge Cummins, Thiessen, SLR Consulting, Golder and Associates, and CN Rail. Happy birthday, CN. They're all incredibly important contributors to our mining supply chain. And importantly, some of their employees may just be your neighbors. So mining, forestry, LNG is not something that's just happening in the hinterland of British Columbia in rural communities. It's alive and well and supports urban economies. So Surrey is a mining community. We like to say every BC community is a mining community. The industry helped build our province and defined who we are, and we're working hard to ensure that it remains an integral part of BC communities, along with our other resource sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Over to Susan. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks very much. Okay, so forestry has had a very, very difficult year. 2019 was probably the worst on record. I've been in the resource sector in the province for about 25 years. I started when I was 12. And I've been through the ups and downs before, but yes, last year was a very, very difficult year. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is the external factors. Everybody knows we have 20+% duties on our products that go to the US. We've got subsidies in Japan, one of our key markets. We've got a lot of competition in China, huge competition from Russia, Czech Republic, Germany, etc. So China, where 25% of our products goes, increasing competition, a lot of external headwinds. But we've also got some stuff domestically that have been going on. You all have heard about beetle infestation in the interior, about fires that have consumed a lot of our fiber. But there's other things. There's constraints on the land base. We've got, in the province of British Columbia, according to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, we have about 52.3% of the land base has some form of conservation designation on that. Now that's important. I live here, my kids live here. I want to have a place where we can recreate and where we can enjoy conservation values, but I also value the economy. I value the opportunity to have a job. And so I think what we need is to have a conversation about what that balance looks like, but we're facing that. We also have a lot of regulatory complexity. I know the minister talked about the exercise that's going to go on for mining, and I 100% applaud that. And I think the only thing I would say, and forestry, and LNG, and oil and gas, and everybody else who operates on the land base, we need to have excellent rules. We all want to protect the environment, no question, but they have to be reasonable. They have to pass the reasonable woman test, really. And they have to be efficient. And they have to allow for timely decision making, because investors have choices, whether they be in forestry, LNG, or mining. Investors have choices, and capital is mobile. It doesn't really care how you vote, what you look like, how you're constituted. They want to go to a place where they can be sure that if a decision is made, a decision can be moved forward. And I think the thing that I find, there's lots of things I find troubling about what's happening now, but what it's saying to us as a country, as a place to invest, is very troubling, because I have teenagers, 2 of them, and I'd like them to work here one day, perhaps in the forest sector or some other place, but I want to have a robust economy. The result for our sector is we've become a super high-cost jurisdiction. And the frustrating thing for me now is when I was in the sector in the late 90s, you know, whenever a market downturn hit, we were always the last man standing. Quebec and Ontario were down because we had super efficient manufacturers here. That picture has completely changed. The Forest Economic Advisors was an outside firm that looks at jurisdictions around the world that were manufacturing forest products. Of 29 jurisdictions that they study, BC is the highest cost. Now, why do we care about that? Well, because Quebec and Ontario are operating now, and our facilities, as many of you have experienced, have been taking significant downtime, and we have to change that. And it's not just a government thing, it's an industry thing, it's a collective challenge that we all have to face if we want to have a forest products sector that continues to be a key driver of the economy. And here's where you're going to hear a lot of commonality. And I got to say, sorry, just saying the forest sector's bigger. Because I got my boys up here. It is a foundational industry. It employs about 100,000 people around the province. It is a place that is employing technology, and it is keeping people in high-paying jobs in many communities outside the Lower Mainland. You know, imitation is the best form of flattery, they say. So the study that Michael has been did last year, which I think was really important work to talk about how his sector is having an impact, not just from a jobs perspective, but also in terms of economic output. We're doing the same thing. We've got A lot of manufacturing here in Surrey, including Teal Jones was mentioned, an amazing BC story that's producing all kinds of value-added products from shingles to guitar tops. The forest sector is using 330 suppliers in this region and spending about $140 million annually. So we need to care about what happens to the forest sector, because this is also a forest-dependent community, just as it is mining, and I think it's really important. I think the last thing I would just say is, you know, we will get back on our feet. This is a highly resilient industry, and it's going to need everybody, you know, pulling together to do that. But it's really important, because I totally agree with both Bryan and Michael. There is an opportunity for British Columbia that's huge. We could effectively shut down our entire industrial base here and not address climate, because we are so relatively small. We have this massive opportunity to displace products that are higher intensity from a GHG perspective. We have products like wood products where, I mean, Surrey's been a leader with the wood buildings that you have created here, the pools, the Surrey Memorial Tower. You are going to be the sister to Vancouver in terms of development. You adopted wood first here in Surrey in 2010. There's a massive opportunity to be supplying the products that the world wants, and BC is very well positioned to do that if we can get out of our own way, actually. And so I look forward to the discussion and to your questions.
Well, thank you, Susan. This is very... Thank you all three for providing a great overview. The resource industry is clearly very important. I'm actually quite heartened this morning amid this gloomy global backdrop. As an economist, there's a lot of things to worry about right now. So I take some comfort in the words that are spoken up here today. Also, Val's presentation I find quite comforting. So I'm going to kick things off with a question or maybe two. Formulate your questions in your own mind, and by all means come up to the mic after they're finished answering the question. But I just want to dig a little deeper. You all did a great job of kind of giving an overview, talking about some of the challenges. But at the Business Council, we are definitely concerned about the province's competitive position, rising tax rates, complexity, all these. I don't want to get into it. I want to leave that for you, and you already touched upon it. But can you dig into a little bit differences between operating in BC and other jurisdictions? Susan, in your sector, I get the sense that forestry is quite healthy elsewhere in North America, not so much in British Columbia. What are some of the differences? You talked about some of the high-level ones, but maybe we can dig a little deeper. Same thing for Michael. Bryan, your answers might be a little different. We were very wealthy in terms of natural gas here in the province. So a couple minutes, be quick, be concise, but let's get some more detail. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the competitiveness situation is, I mean, we're not in our industry, we've got companies, big, medium, and small, and we don't compete against each other. We compete against people who are going into the China market. So we compete against Sweden, Finland. We compete against South American. We compete against the US. So, you know, we're in a global space where people are trading goods all around the world. And that's really important, because that drives, we're a third of the exports of the province, and that's driving a lot of jobs at home. But we actually have to be able to bring our products to market in a way that we can compete with others. And I think the other thing is, you know, Michael was talking about the blockades and the rail disruptions, et cetera. We also have to be able to supply consistently. And I think one of the things I heard when I was in Asia in the fall was this question mark about whether BC is a reliable supplier. And that to me is super troubling. Because when I hear that in Japan, it's very difficult for Japanese CEOs to say that in a public domain directly to, you know, us as an industry. Minister Donaldson was there, he heard those words. Those supply chains are really, really important to us. Japan is probably our oldest export market. It's about 10% of our products go there. We have to have the ability to serve our markets in a way that where we can compete with others, or people will find other suppliers. And that's, you know, that's something we have to be very, very mindful of. And I think, you know, it's in our collective interest to do that, because we have these products with an advantage.
Thanks, Susan. I won't take time to go into, what do other jurisdictions look like, but I will say that, not unlike other commodities, we're, in BC's mining companies, we're price takers, right? Globally, we don't control the price of our commodities. It's set through the market. So the higher costs we have, right, the smaller our margins. And there's a balance there, just like there is for every household in terms of, what it costs to run your household or your company and what you're bringing in, right? And at some point in time, if there's not enough coming in to cover your costs, you have to make a decision, either to move or, downsize or what have you. So right now in BC, and the minister, I think, rightly described the situation we're in, and this last Monday was mining day at the Ledge, and we had a delegation of industry reps met with many ministers and MLAs, both obviously on the government side and the opposition side, to talk about the challenges and opportunities we face as an industry and what that means. And we were very heartened to hear the government is willing to look at the complexity of the regulations that govern our industry. We operate to some of the highest standards in the world in British Columbia. I think across all of these sectors. We've been at it for a long time in British Columbia. We're pretty good at what we do, darn good at what we do. And, as British Columbians, we want to maintain and hold good environmental stewardship. But right now, if you want to, let's say, if you want to build a new mine in British Columbia, which is there's a real long lead time starting from exploration, but you're looking at 6 to 7 years to go through an environmental assessment process. And then there's also more permitting to do. An idea would be, can't we do that concurrently? Is that possible? There's some 5 ministries that touch our permits. It becomes too complex, too costly, too time consuming, and there's too much uncertainty. So that's what, we have and are hoping, that's what we've agreed to start to look at. It's not easy to do, but it's critical to do.
Thanks, Mike. Bryan?
Well, I guess just to add, I'll say, we need to collectively decide that natural resources aren't Brussels sprouts, something that, is just on our plates and we'll eat because we have to. Our natural resource industries are a big part of the solution. And so I love Brussels sprouts too, especially roasted, like they're really good if you haven't had them. So, but listen folks, this is our time and this is our opportunity. We need to come together and move forward together because this is BC's opportunity. So when you think about natural gas and LNG, 10 years ago, 10 countries were importing LNG. Now over 40 are. Why? Because they view it as a solution to getting out of energy poverty. And so when you look at what's happening in the world right now with LNG production, in the last 5 years alone, the United States has approved 115 million tons of LNG production. They've either constructed it or approved it. We've approved one project, 14 million tons. And we're about to produce and have the opportunity to produce the lowest emission product in the world. And yet we're not all in, both feet, saying let's build all of this, let's contribute these global solutions. That's what everyone in this room, that's what we all collectively need to decide. Do we want these foundational industries that are providing global solutions? Do we want this brand new industry? I think we all do, so let's get it done.
Thank you, Bryan. Is there any questions from the floor? Don't be shy, head up to the mic.
Ken, while someone's getting the courage up to ask a question, let me just make a comment. We're talking about the opportunity that exists, and just to reflect back on these blockades and who's who and what's in those pipelines. There's a lot of misinformation. But let me just quickly share a story that came to light on Monday at the legislature. The industry had invited Jerry Asp, who's a Taltan leader and a longtime advocate of bringing the mining industry together with his people. He was recently inducted into the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame. And up in his territory, there's the Bruce Jack mine and the Red Chris mine. There's a large micro hydro site and lots of exploration going on. It's called the Golden Triangle. And Jerry said, you know what? He started what they call the Tahltan Economic Development Corporation. Tough negotiators. If you want to do work in their territory, you've got to come together and come to some agreements, which has happened. No children in care. When he started, they had 98% unemployment. They are at 0 unemployment today. And this is their story, but I will pass it on. Every Tahltan that would like to get a formal education has access to that education. They all receive a dividend. They all work up in their territory. People have a future. They're not managing poverty, which is something that Chief Ellis Ross talks about. That comes with us approaching this opportunity. Natural resources, the land base, it was talked about earlier, coming together, having, realizing the benefits that our resources can bring people, being good stewards. If we keep fighting, this whole opportunity is going to pass us by. And I don't think British Columbians and I don't think the next generation can afford that.
Question? Okay, something that's always been of interest to me, and Mr. Ralston touched on it actually, and I was quite intrigued with the example that he gave, but it's always bothered me that people sometimes make this distinction between the old economy and the new economy, or natural resources and manufacturing and the digital economy. I find it very, very unhelpful, because I think the reality is almost all industries are high-tech in some nature. And a lot of high-tech equipment is deployed and utilized in the natural resource sector. They get high pay because it's a high productivity sector, and they're high productivity because they engage this capital and this advanced technology. All three industries, a lot of technology use. Can you give us some examples, some color? And do you agree with my assessment that it is a sort of an unhelpful distinction to talk about high-tech and sort of old traditional industries? Let's start with Susan. She looks like she's anxious to jump in here.
It's one of the things that drives me crazy too, because if you go into a facility today, whether that be a pulp mill or a sawmill or secondary manufacturing, it's very high tech. Everything is automated, right from how the fiber is brought into the facility. Real-time data is fed into big computer systems that takes market information and scans with optimization technology the log and says, how should you cut that to get maximum value from every piece of the from every bit of the log. Then you're cutting lumber, you're taking the trim ends, you're taking that into finger joined facilities where you're making finger joined lumber. You've got sawdust and shavings that are going in oriented strand board, medium density fiberboard. Chips are going to pulp mills, of course, to make all kinds of different pulp and paper products. And then, of course, you've got residuals that are creating pellets or bioenergy and all kinds of things in between. And it is really interesting when, tech is the shiny object, right? All tech companies and video games and all that kind of stuff. It's the shiny object, which is great. I mean, we want to have a diverse economy. Tech has a place in our economy, and we hope that we grow it. To me, the fact of the matter is, though, Google isn't setting up in Hudson's Hope or Fort St. John or Kitimat, and Microsoft is not going to build, out in, Poughkeepsie or somewhere else in the Peace, right? Which are fantastic communities, all of them. We are a sector that employs a lot of those people there, and we have very high-tech facilities. And we are actually, when you look at the technologies that are being developed, a lot of them right here in British Columbia, fascinating technologies, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, big data is coming from our facilities and helping us make decisions. We're using drone technologies in forest management. We've got LiDAR. The forest sector and many others, we buy the technology that help these small companies, like the Lamazoos in Victoria, commercialize their products, and we're employing it in our business. So I actually think We're a technology, part of the technology industry, and we're employing it in a way that's helping us to make better decisions about the land base and to make more efficient manufacturing facilities. And that's another great news story from British Columbia's perspective.
Like forestry, mining has definitely become a high-tech industry. It is not your grandfather's industry anymore. A lot of people don't know this, but we have BC, Vancouver specifically has one of the highest concentrations of mining professionals in the world. And we have a natural synergy with British Columbia's clean tech and tech sectors. And our industry uses technology to innovate, to conserve more, to reduce our footprint, to manage risk, to become more efficient at accessing the resource. We couldn't actually be the industry that we are today without the high tech and clean tech sectors.
Those are both just really great comments. I guess the only thing I'd kind of add to that is the flavor that, I kind of look at it like a mall. You know, when you go to Guildford Mall, you need anchor tenants in a mall. Anchor tenants are natural resource sectors, those that put down huge capital, huge investments, and then you build economies around that. And when you look at the tech sector, you look at mining and forestry and the fact that they're hubs of economic activity in this province, it's because they set down the roots and others provide services to them. And I think that's the mistake we've made when talking about this tech sector over the past couple of decades, is that they're a standalone sector. The tech sector is a service sector. They provide services and solutions to industries, and in this province predominantly it's the natural resource base, and we have a huge amazing ability to forward face to the world in partnership with our tech sector and talk about that in a different way. This is just about talking about ourselves differently as a province. We don't need to do things differently, because guess what, we're already doing it. You're hearing it up here. We need to talk about it differently and be proud of it and get on our front feet, folks, because Surrey is the center of all of this, of where it's happening. So you know what, let's just get after it.
Do we have a question? We do have a question.
You thought I left the room. I'm back with a question. Thanks for firing us up, Brian, as always. Quick question though for Michael on the mining front, thinking about opportunities, because I think we're sensing the headwinds. There's a lot of challenges right now, but we always have to keep our eye on the opportunity. And I might be using the wrong vocab here, Michael, but there is right now federally a critical minerals strategy, I believe. Is this worth touching on? And is this an opportunity for BC? Is that something you can speak to?
That's correct. I can speak to it briefly. There is a federal strategy. In fact, there is a federal minerals and metals plan that it's our understanding that it actually has some engagement among federal officials in Ottawa, and that they're actually serious about implementing it. So we'll wait patiently, but it's got some legs, and they are looking at some of the working with the United States, actually, where both our countries are very concerned about some of these critical minerals that are used in everything from high technology to security, et cetera. So that is something that Canada is looking at, along with the Mining Association of Canada.
Good afternoon, Jeff Morrison with CAP. Quick question, maybe each of you can comment on world demand for your products, compare and contrast maybe the regulatory environments in other places, and then also lastly, the GHG intensity of the products from BC versus those competing jurisdictions.
Who's going to start?
3 parts.
3 parts.
Can you say that again?
GHG intensity.
Demand? GHG intensity.
Just before you start, we're running up against time, so you're going to have to cover those relatively quickly.
Demand's up and down, as you would expect. Housing looks better in the U.S., big market for us. We remain hopeful, but I got to say the coronavirus and what that's going to happen, we don't know. It's an uncertain thing. But generally, there's very strong demand for wood products because everyone is looking towards wood products as part of the climate solution. Building with wood, multi-story buildings, tall buildings, things. If you're building something with wood, it's capturing the carbon for the life of that. So wood is in demand and will continue to be, as well as fiber. One comment, Stora Enso, one of the big companies in Finland, is basically saying that everything that you're making from fossil fuels today, you can eventually make from fiber. And so, I don't know, you're not designers, but Marimekko, which is a very famous fashion designer, they're now making their products out of recycled fiber. So the world is moving in that direction, and there's lots of opportunities. So demand, I think, is going to continue to go. Regulatory environment, our environment here is super tough. And that's why people are making choices to put capital in other places. And that is something that we have to stop. And it's not anyone's fault. We just are where we are, and we have to change that, or capital will flow to other places where it's easier to get things done. And there were some examples about how long it takes. I have some experience permitting large projects. I've got a lot of scar tissue, and it takes a long time, and so we need to fix that. We want good regulation, but it's got to be sensible. Third piece, GHG intensity. All of our products, because of the legacy of our large hydro system, we have low intensity products, and that is a great strategic advantage that our province has. And so everything that we build here, you know, we've got a 96, 97% clean system, electricity. That gives us a huge advantage just off the get-go.
Thanks, Susan. The more market share that BC commodities can earn, the more the GHG reduction globally. Here's how it works. There's been a benchmarking exercise that's been undertaken by many industries and the government of BC. We know that the copper that we produce in BC is among and has among the lowest GHG footprint anywhere, right? So instead of, you know, out there, you know, companies who are buying copper, when they buy our copper, there's a lower GHG consumption happening there, as opposed to buying copper, let's say, that was made in country X, and it emitted much more. So that's why it's so important, just on the climate change perspective, for us to grab this opportunity, right? Forest products, mines and minerals, the cleanest LNG project in the world. Where's the downside? I don't see it.
Does anybody know which country had the largest emission reductions last year? Take a guess. I heard it out there, but it's someone who probably knows the answer, yes. It's the United States. Donald Trump's America had the largest reductions in emissions last year. Do you know why? Because they switched from coal to natural gas. This is the opportunity right now to get our product to Asia. 80% of the emissions growth on the planet Earth right now is coming from Asia. We have the lowest emission LNG in the world. The demand is high. You're hearing lots of talk out there, oh, there's a glut of LNG on the market right now, prices are dropping, oh, why are we even building the LNG Canada project? We're building these projects for the next 5 to 10 to 20 years out. And the demand is huge for natural gas precisely because of those reasons. Emissions are going way up in Asia. Particulate matter is way up. 7 million people die every single year because of poor air quality. Coal to natural gas switching, as you know, for any of you that have natural gas barbecues or stoves in your home, there's no particulate matter. You turn it on, you cook your food, you go about your day. That's our opportunity. So I'll leave it there on LNG. It's just so very clear that it's so time for Canada to take our global place and provide that outsized role that we always do in global solutions.
Thank you, Bryan. We're running up against time, but I definitely want to take this last question, and then the business that I have to go through towards the end, I'll read really quickly, and you'll bear with me as I talk.
Sure. Dean Garofano, I'm with the Delta Cedar Group, and we've got 2 sawmills here on the coast, and we employ about 270 people. Probably looking for Susan to comment here. You know, we have had a difficult time in this industry, and just recently there was an OIC put into council on the MFPR changes, and we're extremely concerned for our employees as well as the whole industry that the way it's currently written will have a net effect of job loss, kind of the opposite of what they're looking for. And I was hoping Susan could maybe just comment on that a little bit and give her thoughts.
So what Dean is referring to is regulation around manufacturing. And so, I mean, there are challenges with it. And my understanding is that government is prepared to work with industry to try and address some of those challenges. But we share your concern. It's about what I said, in being able to serve our customers, because our customers have choices. And if we constrain the ability, not only are we high-cost jurisdiction here in the province of British Columbia, if we then constrain our ability to serve our customers, it's a double whammy, and it's going to be very difficult for companies. I trust that, I know that the government shares our view, our desire to grow the forest products sector, to have a vibrant sector here that continues to deliver a lot of jobs. I think it's in everybody's interest to do so, and so, you know, we'll be working with the Deputy Minister and with the Minister to try and make sure that we can impress upon them the consequences that might come from unintentional consequences in the desire to create one behavior. You actually could create something else, and I think we've seen experience with that. We all want to revitalize things. But you have to do it in a way that allows us to compete in the global marketplace and to be able to serve our customers who really want the high quality wood products that your company and others are producing for the world. So I am hopeful that we will come to a good place.
Just
Well,
one.
that was supposed to be the last, but I can't say no, so I'll read extra fast at the end.
Thank you. One final question. The Surrey Board of Trade, we released Surrey's first ever labor market study and workforce strategy to 2029. Can you address very quickly skills shortages that each of your industries are facing, how you're tying industry needs to education?
Maybe I'll start because it's great to have Cliff here today, Chief White, because I get the chance to work with him regularly on a committee that the Minister chairs, actually the Workforce Development Advisory Group, and it's actually a group that's put together by government to advise on exactly that as we build out the LNG industry. What are the skills we're going to be needing? How's that going to cascade across the province? Because when you look at building in northern BC, it's not just going to be northern British Columbians, it's going to be British Columbians coming from all over the province. So how do those skill gaps get filled from people coming up to take opportunities? And really importantly, how do we ensure that our Indigenous communities get the opportunities and get the training and career opportunities that come from this? So it's a really, really really cool, you know, group to be a part of that's really doing the work on that from a perspective of an industry that's looking to grow. So I think there's much more that, you know, that we're working on as we look for more in future projects, and hopefully Wood Fibre making their positive final investment decision shortly. And I know Rob's talking right now, so I won't put him on the spot. But he's talking to the minister, so you can't. But so there's lots going on in that regard when it comes to the LNG opportunity, and then I'll let Michael and Susan talk.
In the mining sector, 2 years ago, a organization was formed, or the Mining Jobs Task Force, industry, government, labor, Indigenous representation, academia. They came together. There was some 28 formal recommendations made. Government accepted all of those recommendations. They are all to be implemented. A few of those pertain to skills training. We do know that in mining there is a pending kind of bulge of retirees. Boomers are starting to fade out. I say that kindly. Did that sound okay? I am not a boomer. No disrespect to boomers. Anyways, that said, so we're preparing for that. One thing that the Mining Jobs Task Force did kind of declare and decide on was that our industry does desire to be more inclusive. So we are undertaking studies right now, both public and private sector, looking at how we can bring more women into mining. across the province, as well as bring in more Indigenous participation. So we're very proud that we made that decision, that we're looking that way, and I think it will be a good thing for our industry and for BC.
So in the forest sector, we've done a look at what our job needs are going to be over the next 10 years. And in the 10 years that from today, we expect to be hiring about 25,000 people to our sector. It's about 2,500 people a year, because within the next 10 years, 50% of our workforce will be eligible to retire. Now, they may not retire, but they will be eligible to do so. And so the challenging thing for us when we see the numbers that Val Litwin put up there is, people hear news about the forest sector, and we're in a transition for sure, and it's very difficult. But this sector isn't going anywhere. It's got a bright future. There is huge demand for wood and for wood products and for all kinds of things that are made, for pulp, for paper, things that are made from fiber. There's opportunities across the globe for our sector, and we've got people and technology. We've been green building leaders. We were the first. We had the tallest wood structure. Now Norway has it, but we had the tallest wood structure for a very long period of time. We've developed infill wall systems. We're sending our technology to other places. The jobs in the forest sector, it won't be pulling stuff off the green chain. These are tech jobs. They require, there are still jobs that are highly more manual, but there are a lot of highly skilled jobs that pay very well. And what the challenge for us is to continue to talk about the opportunity that's in our sector. The jobs may look a little bit different, but there are going to be many of them, and we've got to attract people to meet the needs of our businesses going forward. So we are actively involved in that work as well.
Right, thank you. That's all the time we have for questions. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their insightful and informative comments. And I just want to recap and touch on a few of the themes that I heard. A number of them were consistent. Without a doubt, the notion or it is very, very clear that resources are still very important to BC's prosperity and well-being. I spent a lot of time looking at the provincial economy, growth, what drives it. I knew that, but it was very well presented and articulated here, and that's a message that I think everybody needs to take away from this session today. Another message that I think people should take away is BC products have lower greenhouse gas intensity. That gives BC a huge advantage. I'm not sure that's widely known out in the public, but that is a message that needs to be disseminated. It's important. It gives us a competitive advantage in the future. And then finally, I heard about an abundance of opportunity, wealth, prosperity, growth, new jobs, and particularly opportunity and socioeconomic benefits for First Nations communities. So I think it is important that we all support these industries and the connections and linkages down to the Lower Mainland. Great examples of those. We have been saying this at the business. I've been saying it for 20 years. I'm almost tired of saying it, but it's actually very, very, very true. The connections are dramatic, they're large, and they're substantial. So on behalf of everyone, and on behalf of the Surrey Board of Trade, I'd like to thank Bryan, Michael, Susan for taking the time with us today, providing your insights and clarity into the impact and importance of your industries. I also want to thank Val, the Honourable Bruce Ralston, and Chief Clifford. Please join me. Thank you. Two more small business items before we dismiss. Thanking our sponsors, supporting sponsors, Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and CN Rail, community sponsors, BCIT and Fortis BC, media sponsor, the Surrey Now Leader Media Group, and business and international trade center sponsors, Fasken, PwC, Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, and SNF Group Benefits. Thank you. Finally, before you slip out, a few upcoming events at the Surrey Board of Trade is having. March 5th, it's my birthday. Join them for networking. Maybe I'll get a free ticket. Join them for networking, champagne, shopping at Turnabout Luxury Resale. March 6th, the Surrey Board of Trade will host Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Claire Trevina for a discussion on transportation in Surrey and the region. I would like to come to that event as well, Anita. March 10th, the Surrey Board of Trade is hosting Premier John Horgan for a BC economic update with a particular focus on what's going on in BC. March 12th, Board of Trade is hosting a sold-out event, the 11th Annual Surrey Women in Business Awards, with the Masters of Ceremony, Mi Jung Lee of CTV and Erin Brockovich as the special keynote speaker. And on March 26th, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Perrin Beatty will be in Surrey speaking on the importance of pipeline, rail, and port projects. Thank you for supporting the Surrey Board of Trade, where Surrey is an opportunity city. Go out and make it a great business day.